Dr. Amara Washington stands frozen as champagne drips down her designer suit, the airline staff's laughter echoing in her ears. VIP is reserved for actual important people, the attendant sneers. Little do they know, Air Force One awaits her command after this commercial flight's unexpected diversion. Before we dive deeper into this shocking story, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever witnessed or experienced discrimination in any form. The journey we're about to embark on might change your perspective forever. Behind the champagne-soaked suit stood Dr. Amara Washington, a 52-year-old brilliant neurosurgeon turned politician, now making history as the first black female president of the United States. The incident at the airport lounge was just the latest in a lifetime of similar encounters, though perhaps the most ironic given her new position of power. Amara's story began in the humid streets of Savannah, Georgia, where her mother Loretta Griffin raised her alone while working 3 jobs, morning shifts at a local diner, afternoon hours as a school janitor, and weekend housekeeping for wealthy families. Despite the exhaustion etched into her mother's face each night, Loretta always found energy to help Amara with homework, instilling in her daughter an unshakable belief that education was the one ladder no one could take away. "My mama used to tell me, they can ignore you, they can insult you, but they can't ignore what's in your head if you make it too magnificent to dismiss," Amara often recounted in speeches. Those words carried her through Westside High School, where she graduated as valedictorian despite counselors suggesting she pursue more realistic goals than medicine. Her academic excellence earned her a full scholarship to Howard University, where she graduated summa cum laude in biological sciences. Harvard Medical School followed, where she was one of only 7 black students in her class. During her time there, she developed a revolutionary technique for pediatric neurosurgery that reduced recovery time by 40% and became standard practice across the country. Dr. Washington spent 20 years at Johns Hopkins, becoming the youngest department head in the hospital's history. Her groundbreaking research on neural pathway regeneration earned her 2 Nobel Prize nominations and saved thousands of lives. But witnessing healthcare disparities firsthand pushed her toward advocacy and eventually politics. She served first as Baltimore's health commissioner, then Maryland's lieutenant governor, and finally as a popular 2-term senator known for building bipartisan support for healthcare reform. Her presidential campaign had focused on unity and practical solutions rather than divisive rhetoric, helping her secure a narrow but decisive victory. The inauguration was still 2 weeks away, but most presidential duties had already transitioned to her team. Today's flight was supposed to be simple, a quick trip from Atlanta back to Washington, D.C. after visiting her mother, who still lived in the modest Savannah home where Amara grew up. The severe weather system that had unexpectedly intensified over the southeast had forced her security detail to reroute. The original plan to fly on a government aircraft had been scrapped when the nearest available plane needed emergency maintenance. Rather than wait, Amara had insisted on taking a commercial flight, against the strong objections of her chief of security. "One commercial flight with minimal security won't kill me," she had told them. "The inauguration is in 2 weeks. Let me have this last moment of semi-normalcy." She had compromised by allowing one Secret Service agent, Derek Jackson, to accompany her, provided they traveled incognito. Derek, a 15-year veteran of presidential protection, had reluctantly agreed but stayed within arm's reach throughout the journey. "Madam President-elect, this is highly irregular," Derek had reminded her for the 10th time as they approached the airport. "Which is precisely why I need to do it," Amara had replied. 2 more weeks and I won't be able to go anywhere without a motorcade and 20 agents. I need to remember what real life feels like before I spend 4 years in the bubble." What she hadn't mentioned to Derek was her lifelong personal rule: never use position or connections for special treatment. Her mother had taught her that true character shows in how you act when no one knows who you are. Little did she know that today would test that principle in ways she never imagined. The gleaming expanse of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport bustled with its usual controlled chaos as Amara and Derek approached the check-in counters. Dressed in a simple navy pantsuit with her hair pulled back in a modest bun, she blended perfectly with the business travelers hurrying to their gates. Only her Secret Service agent's watchful eyes and the slight bulge of his concealed weapon hinted at anything unusual. "Remember, low profile," Amara murmured to Derek as they joined the first-class check-in line. "I'm just Dr. Griffin today." She had chosen to use her mother's maiden name, a common enough practice for public figures traveling privately and one that gave her a small taste of anonymity. When they reached the counter, the gate agent, a blonde woman whose name tag read Bethany Carter, barely glanced up from her computer. Her fingers tapped against the keyboard as she asked in a monotone voice, "Destination?" "Washington, D.C., Flight 1552, Amara replied with a warm smile. Bethany's eyes flicked up, quickly assessing Amara, and something in her expression shifted. The professional indifference hardened into something colder as she noticed the first-class tickets in Amara's hand. "Photo ID, please," she said, the warmth in her voice dropping several degrees. Amara provided her identification, which matched the Dr. Griffin name on the ticket, thanks to careful preparation by her staff. Bethany scrutinized the ID with unusual thoroughness, holding it up to the light and examining the holographic elements multiple times. "Is there a problem?" Amara asked, maintaining her composure. "These first-class tickets seem unusual," Bethany replied, her emphasis on unusual carrying an unmistakable subtext. "Were these purchased through a special promotion or employee discount program?" "No, they were purchased at full price through your airline's website," Amara answered calmly, though she felt the familiar knot forming in her stomach, one that had accompanied similar interactions throughout her life. "And it's definitely you in this photo ID." "The hair is quite different." Behind her, Derek shifted his weight, a subtle indication of his growing concern. Amara placed a gentle hand on his arm without looking back, a signal they had established to stand down. As Bethany continued her unnecessarily thorough verification, two other gate agents conversed nearby, their voices just loud enough to be overheard. "Third one this week," one muttered to the other. "They always try to upgrade with these point schemes or whatever." "Tell me about it," the other replied with a knowing look toward Amara. "Then they act all surprised when we actually check their documentation." Derek cleared his throat loudly, his patience visibly wearing thin. "Is there a supervisor available?" he began, but Amara squeezed his arm again. "It's fine," she whispered. This wasn't her first encounter with such treatment, and it wouldn't be her last, despite her new title. Throughout her career, from medical school to the surgical theater to the Senate floor, she had faced similar moments of being questioned, doubted, and scrutinized in ways her colleagues rarely experienced. She remembered a conference in Geneva where she, the keynote speaker, had been repeatedly directed to the support staff registration. The memory of a patient who had refused her care, demanding a real doctor despite her being the department head. The Senate committee members who addressed questions to her male aides rather than to her directly. Each time, she had chosen the same response: quiet dignity, impeccable competence, and a refusal to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her composure crack. Final boarding call for first-class passengers on Flight 1552 to Washington, D.C., announced the overhead speaker, breaking the tense standoff. Bethany reluctantly handed back the ID and boarding passes. "Gate 24B, she said curtly. "Boarding now." As they walked away, Amara maintained her practiced smile, though inside she was reminding herself of what her mother always said: "Your dignity ain't never for sale, not even when they're trying to buy it with disrespect." Derek leaned in as they walked. "Dr. Griffin, with all due respect, one word from you, Anne." "And what?" Amara interrupted gently. "Force respect through fear and position." "That's not change, Derek. That's just temporary compliance. Besides," she added with a small smile, "we have a plane to catch." The first-class cabin of Flight 1552 gleamed with polished surfaces and plush leather seats. As Amara stepped aboard, flight attendant Jessica Miller greeted white passengers with warm smiles and offers of pre-flight beverages. When Amara approached, Jessica's smile vanished, replaced by a professional mask of cool efficiency. "Boarding pass," Jessica requested, her tone clipped. She examined Amara's documentation with the same unnecessary scrutiny Bethany had displayed at check-in. 12. Window seat near the back of first class. Amara nodded politely and moved forward, aware of Jessica's eyes following her with obvious suspicion. As she located her seat, she noticed a middle-aged white man in the adjacent seat, 12B according to the configuration. His expensive watch and tailored suit marked him as a frequent business traveler. "Good afternoon," Amara greeted him as she prepared to take her seat. The man, whose later conversation with a flight attendant would identify him as Keith Harrington, looked up from his phone with a start. His eyes narrowed as he assessed Amara, then widened in apparent dismay. Without returning her greeting, he pressed the call button above his seat. Jessica appeared almost instantly. "Yes, sir. How can I help you?" Keith lowered his voice, but not enough to prevent Amara from hearing. "Is there another seat available? Perhaps closer to the front?" "Of course, Mr. Harrington. We have 4A available. Would you prefer that?" "Perfect. Thank you." Without a glance at Amara, Keith gathered his belongings and moved to his new seat, leaving her alone in the row. She took a deep breath and settled into her window seat, unzipping her briefcase to retrieve work documents. Years of similar experiences had taught her to always bring something productive to focus on during uncomfortable moments. Derek, seated across the aisle in 12C, caught her eye with a look that communicated his growing frustration. Amara gave him a subtle headshake. She had survived far worse than this. She had just opened a policy brief when another voice interrupted her concentration. "Excuse me, ma'am. There seems to be a mistake." Looking up, Amara found herself facing Bradley Thompson, the flight purser, a man in his late 40s with a neatly trimmed beard and the confident demeanor of someone accustomed to authority. "This section is first class," he said, his tone suggesting he was explaining something to a child. "Your boarding pass, please." For the third time, Amara produced her documentation. Bradley examined it with exaggerated care before saying, "This shows 12A, but you're in 12A window seat." "Yes," Amara replied calmly. 12A is a window seat according to the seating chart. Bradley's eyebrows rose. "Are you sure you haven't made a mistake? Perhaps you misunderstood the boarding process for first class." Derek shifted visibly in his seat, his hand moving slightly toward his jacket. Amara gave him another warning glance before responding. "I'm quite familiar with first-class procedures, thank you," she said evenly. "My ticket is for 12A, which is this window seat." Bradley studied her face, seeming surprised by her articulate response. "You must be new to flying first class," he said with a condescending smile. "No worries, we'll sort this out. For now, why don't you move to the middle seat until I can verify everything?" Around them, other passengers observed the interaction with varying reactions. An elderly white woman 3 rows ahead watched with undisguised curiosity. A young Asian man across the aisle studied his magazine with deliberate intensity, clearly uncomfortable. A middle-aged white couple whispered to each other, occasionally glancing toward Amara with what appeared to be amusement. "I'm quite comfortable here in my assigned seat, thank you," Amara replied, her voice pleasant but firm. "If there's any confusion about the seating arrangement, I'm happy to wait while you verify it with the gate agent." Bradley's smile tightened. "As you wish. Please understand I'm simply doing my job." "Of course," Amara said. "We all are." As Bradley walked away, the overhead speaker crackled with the captain's voice, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Anderson speaking. I regret to inform you that we're experiencing a slight delay due to air traffic control. Current estimates put our departure at approximately 2 hours from now. The good news is we've arranged for first-class passengers to access the VIP lounge during the wait. Our staff will escort you shortly. We apologize for the inconvenience." A collective groan rose from the cabin, followed by the sounds of passengers retrieving belongings and preparing to deplane. As Jessica began organizing the first-class exit, Amara closed her briefcase and stood. "Excuse me," she said to Jessica, who was carefully avoiding eye contact. "Will I be able to access the VIP lounge as a first-class passenger?" Jessica's eyes flicked over Amara's simple suit and practical handbag. The VIP lounge has certain, additional requirements beyond just a first-class ticket. But you're welcome to try. With that cryptic response, Jessica turned away to assist Keith Harrington with his jacket. Derek moved to Amara's side, his expression grim. "Dr. Griffin," he murmured, using her cover name but injecting it with the respect her real title commanded, "perhaps we should consider alternative arrangements." "No," Amara replied quietly but firmly. "We're going to the VIP lounge, Derek." After all, she added with a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "I'm a first-class passenger. What additional requirements could there possibly be?" The entrance to the Diamond Elite VIP lounge stood like a modern-day fortress, all sleek glass and polished metal, guarded not by armed sentinels but by a slim woman with platinum blonde hair styled in a perfect bob. Her pristine uniform bore a nameplate identifying her as Meredith Wilson, Elite Services Coordinator. Behind her, the promise of luxury beckoned, plush seating, complimentary champagne, and the hushed atmosphere of exclusivity. As the group of first-class passengers approached, Meredith's professional smile activated like a motion sensor. She gracefully checked credentials, greeting each white passenger by name if they were frequent flyers or with warm welcomes if they were new. "Mr. Harrington, lovely to see you again. Your usual seat by the window is available. Mrs. and Mr. Peterson, welcome back. We have a lovely Cabernet breathing just for you. Dr. Silverstein, it's been too long. Your Wi-Fi code is already set up." When Amara reached the entrance, Meredith's smile dimmed several watts. She extended her hand with practiced efficiency. "Membership card, please. I'm a first-class passenger on flight 1552, Amara explained. The captain announced we would have access during the delay. Meredith's perfectly shaped eyebrows arched slightly. "Yes, first-class passengers with diamond or platinum membership status. Your membership card, please." Behind Amara, Derek tensed, but she maintained her composure. "I wasn't informed of any membership requirement. I have my boarding pass showing first-class status." Meredith examined the boarding pass with obvious skepticism. "I see. Unfortunately, the lounge requires additional membership beyond just a first-class ticket. Perhaps there was a misunderstanding." The subtle emphasis on misunderstanding carried an unmistakable implication. That Amara had either deliberately misinterpreted the announcement or simply wasn't intelligent enough to comprehend it correctly. "What do you think about this situation? Has something similar ever happened to you?" Comment number 1 if you believe Meredith is just doing her job and following protocol. Comment number 2 if you think there's something else influencing her behavior. Don't forget to like and subscribe to see how this confrontation unfolds. Would you have kept your cool like Amara, or would you have immediately revealed your identity? Let's continue with this shocking story. As Amara stood her ground, another airline employee approached, a man in his mid-30s with a manager's badge reading, Taylor Stevens. "Is there a problem here, Meredith?" he asked, his eyes moving between the hostess and Amara. "This lady is attempting to access the lounge with just a first-class ticket, no membership," Meredith explained, her tone suggesting she was dealing with an attempted security breach rather than a simple misunderstanding. Taylor turned to Amara with the practiced smile of someone accustomed to denying service while maintaining plausible deniability. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but Meredith is correct. VIP lounge access requires Diamond Elite status in addition to a first-class ticket. It's clearly stated in our terms and conditions." "Interesting," Amara replied calmly. "Because Captain Anderson specifically announced that all first-class passengers would have access during this delay, with no mention of additional requirements." Taylor's smile didn't waver. "I'm sure you misheard. Perhaps you could enjoy our general waiting area. It's quite comfortable as well. Inside the lounge, servers circulated with trays of champagne flutes, offering them to seated passengers. Through the glass partition, Amara could see Keith Harrington accepting a glass with a satisfied smile. Their eyes met briefly, and he quickly looked away. "Is there someone else I could speak with about this policy?" Amara asked. "I am the manager on duty," Taylor replied, his tone hardening slightly. "And I've made the policy clear." As the standoff continued, a tall man in an expensive suit approached the entrance from inside the lounge. Lawrence Phillips, as his later business card would identify him, was a silver-haired executive type with the confident gait of someone unaccustomed to obstacles. As he passed by, his elbow accidentally knocked against the champagne tray of a passing server. The golden liquid arced through the air in what seemed like slow motion before splattering across the front of Amara's navy suit. The cool liquid soaked through immediately, creating a conspicuous stain across her chest and abdomen. "Oh!" Lawrence exclaimed with exaggerated concern that didn't reach his eyes. "How clumsy of me. So sorry about that, miss." His emphasis on "miss" rather than "ma'am" was subtle but deliberate, another small dig at her perceived status. From behind the counter, Meredith's lips twitched in what appeared to be a suppressed smile. Taylor made a show of offering a single cocktail napkin, wholly inadequate for the extent of the spill. "Perhaps this is a sign you should change before your flight," he suggested with false sympathy. "The general restrooms are down the main concourse." Derek stepped forward, his patience finally exhausted. "This is completely unacceptable. Do you have any idea who?" "Derek," Amara cut him off with a sharp glance. "It's just a suit." "But Dr. Griffin, this has gone far enough," he insisted, nearly slipping with her title. Lawrence Phillips sized up Derek's protective stance and Amara's composed demeanor, suddenly less certain about the dynamics at play. "No harm intended," he said, backing away slightly. "Accidents happen." "Indeed they do," Amara agreed, her voice steady despite the champagne now chilling her skin. "Some more accidental than others." Taylor cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable with the escalating tension. "Again, I must insist that without proper membership, you cannot access the VIP lounge. It's reserved for actual important people, not just anyone who purchases a first-class ticket." The phrase, "actual important people," hung in the air, its implication unmistakable. Around them, several onlookers had paused to watch the confrontation, some with discomfort, others with the shameful interest of spectators at a verbal gladiatorial match. Meredith picked up the phone behind the counter. "Should I call security, Taylor? This area needs to remain clear for authorized guests." It was at this precise moment, with champagne dripping from her suit, surrounded by hostile staff and judgmental onlookers, her one protector nearly blowing her cover, that Amara Washington faced a choice that would define not just her day, but potentially set the tone for her presidency. She could reveal her identity and watch these same people transform instantly from contemptuous to sycophantic. She could have Derek make a single phone call that would likely result in numerous terminations and profuse corporate apologies. She could exercise the power that was now hers by right of election. Or she could remain Dr. Griffin, a black woman being denied service despite having the same qualifications as everyone else in that first-class line, experiencing what millions of her fellow citizens experience daily without the escape hatch of revealed status. Before she could decide, heavy footsteps approached from the boarding gate area. "Excuse me, coming through, pardon me," called a deep, authoritative voice. The crowd parted to reveal a tall man in a pilot's uniform adorned with 4 stripes on each shoulder, Captain James Anderson himself, striding purposefully toward the lounge entrance. Captain James Anderson cut an impressive figure as he approached the lounge entrance, his silver-streaked dark hair and commanding presence drawing all eyes in his direction. At 58, the veteran pilot carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had navigated both aircraft and corporate hierarchies with equal skill for over 3 decades. He slowed as he neared the entrance, his practiced smile ready for what he assumed would be routine passenger relations during the delay. Then his eyes fell on Amara, still standing with dignity despite the champagne staining her suit. His stride faltered. He blinked once, twice, as if confirming what his eyes were telling him. "Madam President-elect," he exclaimed, loud enough for everyone in the immediate vicinity to hear. The effect was instantaneous. The entire lounge area fell silent, conversations halting mid-sentence, champagne flutes freezing halfway to lips, all eyes turning toward the woman who had just been denied entry. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved. Meredith Wilson's perfect posture crumpled slightly, her face draining of color so rapidly it was visible even beneath her makeup. Taylor Stevens' mouth opened and closed without producing sound, like a fish suddenly finding itself on dry land. Lawrence Phillips, who had been lingering nearby to watch the drama unfold, seemed to physically shrink, taking 2 steps backward as if trying to disappear into the potted plant behind him. Captain Anderson recovered quickly, stepping forward with an outstretched hand. "Dr. Washington, I can't believe it's you. We worked together on that military hospital initiative in 2014, I was still in the Air Force Reserve then. You performed surgery on my nephew after his accident. Changed his life. I never expected. I mean, I had no idea you would be on my flight today." Amara shook his hand, her composure unbroken despite the revelation. "Captain Anderson. It's good to see you again. And yes, I remember your nephew. Timothy, wasn't it? Brilliant young man." "Yes, ma'am. He's finishing medical school now, actually. Because of you." The captain turned to the staff, his expression hardening. "Has there been some kind of problem here?" Taylor unfroze first, his customer service training kicking in through the shock. "Absolutely no problem, Captain. We were just about to escort the press, Dr. Washington, to our premium section." His voice had risen nearly an octave. Meredith emerged from behind the counter with almost supernatural speed, suddenly materializing at Amara's side. "Madam President-elect, please allow me to personally assist you with that spill. We have a private area with full facilities where you can freshen up." Lawrence Phillips had already retreated several yards, pretending to be engrossed in his phone, though his eyes kept darting up to monitor the situation. Derek, who had been maintaining his protective stance near Amara throughout the confrontation, now stepped slightly forward and discreetly opened his jacket to reveal the presidential seal on his inner credential holder, confirming to anyone still doubting that this was, indeed, the President-elect of the United States. "Well," Amara said after a moment, her voice carrying in the stunned silence, "this is a bit awkward, isn't it?" Captain Anderson looked between Amara and the staff, quickly assessing the situation. "May I ask what happened here, Madam President-elect?" Before Amara could respond, Taylor interjected. "A simple misunderstanding about our membership policy, Captain. Nothing more." "And the champagne on Dr. Washington's suit," the captain pressed, his tone making it clear he wasn't accepting the simplistic explanation. "An unfortunate accident," Lawrence Phillips called from his new position several feet away, having apparently found his voice again. "Could have happened to anyone." Amara studied the faces around her, the staff's expressions now transformed from dismissal to fear, the onlookers from amusement to shock, Derek's from frustration to grim satisfaction. Only Captain Anderson's face showed genuine respect rather than panic. "Captain," she said quietly, "I'd appreciate if we could keep this situation low-key. I'm traveling semi-privately today." "Of course, Madam President-elect," he replied, though the title had already done its damage. Throughout the lounge, passengers were reaching for phones, and the whispers had begun to spread like wildfire. The entire dynamic had shifted in seconds. Where moments before Amara had been fighting for the basic respect afforded to other first-class passengers, now the pendulum had swung to the opposite extreme. Meredith was practically trembling with obsequiousness, offering everything from a complete wardrobe replacement to having her car brought around if she preferred to leave the airport entirely. "Perhaps you'd prefer our executive suite, Madam President-elect," Taylor suggested, his former condescension replaced by exaggerated deference. "It's completely private and offers all amenities." We typically reserve it for visiting dignitaries and our highest value customers. Our highest value customers, Amara repeated softly, the irony not lost on her. And who determined I wasn't among them until a moment ago? The question hung in the air, unanswerable in its simplicity. Captain Anderson cleared his throat, offering a lifeline to the increasingly uncomfortable staff. Ma'am, if you'll allow me, I'd be honored to personally escort you to a private area where you can regroup. We have a pilot's lounge nearby that's much quieter than this circus. He gestured to the growing crowd of curious onlookers. Amara considered the offer, weighing her options. The principle that had guided her throughout her life, never using position for special treatment, now faced its greatest test. Before her identity was revealed, she had been denied the basic respect and service offered to others with the same ticket. Now that her identity was known, she was being offered excessive preferential treatment. Neither extreme represented the equal treatment she had fought for throughout her career. The irony wasn't lost on her, how quickly discrimination could transform into sycophancy when power was recognized. Captain Anderson, she said finally, I would appreciate that escort. But first, she turned to Taylor, I believe we need to discuss what happened here today, don't you? Taylor swallowed visibly. Yes, Madam President-elect. Whenever and however you wish. Around them, airport staff had begun to gather, word spreading through the terminal like an electrical current. In the distance, Amara could see security personnel moving in their direction, undoubtedly alerted to the presence of a VIP. Derek leaned in. Ma'am, our cover is completely blown. Protocol suggests we contact the full detail immediately. Amara nodded, the weight of her office settling back onto her shoulders. The brief experiment with normalcy had ended, but perhaps not without purpose. She turned to Captain Anderson. Lead the way, Captain. I believe we have a situation to address before our flight. As they moved away from the lounge entrance, Amara felt the eyes of everyone following her, some horrified at how they had treated her, others calculating the potential consequences, still others simply starstruck. The champagne on her suit was already drying, but the stain would remain, a visible reminder of what had transpired. Just like the memory of this day would remain with everyone involved, long after the stain was cleaned away. News of the President-elect's presence spread through Hartsfield-Jackson Airport with the speed and efficiency of the facility's own high-tech baggage system. Within 15 minutes, the information had traveled from the VIP lounge to every gate, restaurant, and shop in the massive terminal complex. Captain Anderson led Amara and Derek through a series of staff-only corridors, bypassing the main concourse where passengers had already begun gathering with phones raised, hoping for a glimpse or photo. The pilot's lounge, a modest but comfortable space reserved for flight crews between assignments, offered temporary sanctuary from the growing commotion. I can't apologize enough for what happened out there, Madam President-elect, Captain Anderson said as he closed the door behind them. That's not who we are as an airline, or at least, not who we should be. Please, Captain. James, was it? Amara said, settling into an armchair and finally allowing herself a moment to process the events. I appreciate your concern, but this isn't your personal responsibility to bear. With respect, ma'am, as the captain of that flight, everything that happens is ultimately my responsibility, he replied with the gravity of someone who had spent decades making life-or-death decisions. And as a human being, witnessing that kind of treatment of anyone, let alone our incoming commander-in-chief, I'm personally ashamed. Derek, who had positioned himself near the door, phone already to his ear, interjected, full security detail is mobilizing, ma'am. ETA 12 minutes. Chief of Staff has been notified and is requesting a brief call at your convenience. Amara nodded her acknowledgement before turning back to Captain Anderson. James, I've spent my entire life experiencing variations of what happened today. The only difference is that usually I don't have the option of having someone recognize me and flip the script. Before the captain could respond, a sharp knock came at the door. Derek checked the security peephole before stepping aside to admit a harried-looking man in an expensive suit. Madam President-elect, the man said, slightly breathless from what appeared to have been a sprint through the terminal. Nicholas Bryant, Airport Director. I cannot begin to express our profound apologies for this incident. We've already initiated. He was interrupted by another knock, this one revealing a woman in her early 50s wearing the distinctive uniform of the airline's executive team. Christine Reynolds, Vice President of Customer Experience, she introduced herself with practiced poise that couldn't quite mask her anxiety. Madam President-elect, on behalf of the entire airline family. Within minutes, the modest pilot's lounge had transformed into an impromptu crisis management center. Airport executives, airline representatives, and security personnel crowded into the space, each attempting to distance themselves from the incident while simultaneously positioning their response as swift and decisive. Amara observed the performance with the clinical detachment she had once used in operating rooms, noting symptoms, diagnosing underlying conditions, assessing options for treatment. The corporate immunity response was textbook: isolate the perceived infection, the staff involved, flood the system with apologetic platitudes, and attempt to excise the memory of the incident with offers of compensation and privilege. We've already begun drafting termination paperwork for the employees involved, Christine Reynolds was saying, her designer glasses emphasizing her serious expression. And we'd like to offer you lifetime Diamond Elite status as a small token of. No, Amara interrupted quietly but firmly. I don't want anyone fired without a proper investigation and due process. The executives exchanged confused glances, clearly having expected either rage or a desire for revenge, the typical responses they'd seen from far less powerful people who had experienced far less egregious treatment. But Madam President-elect, Nicholas Bryant began carefully, surely you agree that their behavior was completely unacceptable and reflects. What their behavior reflects, Amara interrupted again, is something much larger than individual failings. I'm more interested in understanding the systems that made them believe their actions were appropriate than in punishing a few people while the underlying problems remain untouched. Her phone vibrated with an incoming call, her chief of staff for the 5th time in as many minutes. The situation was escalating beyond the airport now. Amara could practically visualize the concentric circles of impact spreading outward, from the lounge to the airport, from the airport to corporate headquarters, from headquarters to national media, from media to public discourse, and eventually to policy implications for her nascent administration. As if on cue, Christine's phone chimed with a notification. Madam President-elect, she said after checking the screen, our CEO Gregory Williamson is on an emergency video call from New York. He's requesting to speak with you directly. Amara considered the request. This incident, unwelcome as it had been, now presented an unexpected opportunity, a chance to address systemic issues from a position of both personal experience and institutional power. I'll speak with him, she decided, but not alone. I want the staff involved present as well. The staff? Christine repeated, unable to hide her shock. You want to meet with the people who? Yes, Amara confirmed. Meredith, Taylor, and anyone else directly involved in what happened. Also, the flight attendant, Jessica, I believe, and the gate agent Bethany. And Mr. Phillips, the passenger who spilled champagne on me. The executive's discomfort was palpable. Having the president-elect confront her discriminators directly, with the CEO witnessing, was unprecedented and unpredictable, two qualities corporate damage control teams worked tirelessly to avoid. Madam President-elect, Nicholas began cautiously, while we completely support your desire for a thorough review, perhaps a more structured approach through proper channels. This is the proper channel, Mr. Bryant, Amara replied with the same calm authority that had guided her through countless high-pressure surgeries and legislative negotiations. Direct communication with those involved, while the experience is still fresh. Before reports are sanitized and testimonies are rehearsed. Derek, who had been monitoring both the room and his communications devices, approached Amara. Ma'am, security detail has established a perimeter. Media presence is growing outside, someone leaked your location. And the story is already hitting social media with various levels of accuracy. Amara nodded, unsurprised. Thank you, Derek. Please inform them I'll be making no statements at this time. She turned back to the assembled executives. I need a conference room large enough for the meeting I've requested, secure from media and public view. Can that be arranged? The question wasn't really a question, it was a test of their willingness to accommodate an uncomfortable truth-seeking process rather than a convenient corporate resolution. After a moment of silent communication through glances, Christine nodded. We have a secure executive boardroom nearby. I'll have it prepared immediately. And the staff? Amara pressed. We'll locate them, Nicholas confirmed reluctantly. Good. And please ensure they understand they're not being summoned for punishment. This is about honest conversation, not retribution. As the executives dispersed to make arrangements, Captain Anderson, who had been quietly observing from near the door, approached Amara. If I may say so, Madam President-elect, this is not how most VIPs handle these situations. Amara smiled slightly. Perhaps that's precisely the problem, Captain. Too many people with power choose comfort over clarity, quick resolution over real change. My mother taught me that responsibility isn't just about what you can do, it's about what you should do. My crew and I stand ready to assist however you need, he offered. And for what it's worth, I think your approach is exactly what this industry, and maybe this country, has needed for a long time. Outside the protected bubble of the pilot's lounge, the airport continued its normal operations, gates filling and emptying in the perpetual rhythm of modern travel. But rippling through that normalcy was an undercurrent of anticipation, the shared awareness that something significant was unfolding, something that might, in its own way, alter the journey they were all on together. The executive boardroom on the airport's administrative level presented a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding in the public terminals. With its mahogany table, leather chairs, and soundproofed walls, it had been designed for high-level corporate decisions, not for uncomfortable conversations about racial bias and social inequality. Today, however, it would serve a different purpose. Amara sat at the center of the table's long side, Derek positioned unobtrusively behind her right shoulder. Directly across from her, a large video screen displayed the face of Gregory Williamson, the airline's CEO, a man in his early 60s with carefully maintained silver hair and the practiced neutral expression of someone who had navigated countless corporate crises. To Amara's left and right sat the airport and airline executives, their body language betraying varying degrees of discomfort. And at the far end of the table, clustered together like reluctant witnesses at a trial, were the staff members involved in the incident, Meredith Wilson and Taylor Stevens from the VIP lounge, flight attendant Jessica Miller, gate agent Bethany Carter, and flight purser Bradley Thompson. Lawrence Phillips, the passenger who had spilled champagne on Amara, had been located in another terminal lounge and now sat slightly apart from the others, his expensive suit and confident posture suggesting he felt out of place among the airline staff. The tension in the room was thick enough to touch, a palpable pressure that seemed to compress the air itself. Most of the staff kept their eyes fixed on the table, though Taylor occasionally glanced toward the executives as if seeking guidance or reassurance. Amara allowed the silence to settle for a moment before speaking. Thank you all for joining me. I know this is unusual, and I appreciate your willingness to participate in what I hope will be an honest and productive conversation. From the screen, CEO Williamson nodded gravely. Madam President-elect, before we begin, please allow me to extend my deepest personal apologies for the inexcusable treatment you experienced today. I want to assure you that what happened does not reflect our company values or policies, and we are committed to taking immediate corrective action, including. Thank you, Mr. Williamson, Amara interrupted gently. But before we discuss corrective action, I'd like to understand what actually happened and why. She turned her attention to the staff members, noting their nervous expressions. I want to be clear, this isn't about punishment. You aren't here to be reprimanded or terminated. You're here because you were part of an interaction that I believe reflects a much larger pattern, one that affects millions of Americans every day. I'm interested in your honest perspective. The staff exchanged uncertain glances, clearly skeptical of her assurances. It was Bradley Thompson, the flight purser, who finally broke the ice. "With respect, Madam President-elect," he began, his voice steadier than might have been expected, "if this isn't about our jobs, what exactly is it about?" Amara considered the question. "It's about understanding. Throughout my life, as a student, a doctor, a senator, and now as President-elect, I've experienced countless variations of what happened today. The difference is that today, Captain Anderson recognized me, and suddenly everyone's behavior changed completely." She leaned forward slightly. "That transformation, from dismissal to deference in a matter of seconds, tells us something important about how we perceive and treat each other based on perceived status and identity. Don't you think that's worth examining?" The question hung in the air, both an invitation and a challenge. Taylor cleared his throat. "Madam President-elect, I want to emphasize that we were simply following standard protocols for VIP access. There was no racial." "Please, Taylor," Amara interjected. "Let's be honest with each other. Would you have subjected a middle-aged white man in a business suit to the same level of scrutiny and skepticism?" The directness of the question caused Taylor to falter. We treat all passengers according to the same standards." "Do you?" Amara pressed gently. "When was the last time you asked a white executive to move from their assigned first-class seat because you assumed they didn't belong there?" Bradley Thompson shifted uncomfortably. "Madam President-elect, if I may. Taylor's right about the protocols, but you're right too." He paused, seeming to gather courage. "I've worked for this airline for 22 years, and I've seen, hell, I've participated in, exactly what you're describing. We do make assumptions. We do treat people differently based on how they look." The admission seemed to release something in the room, a collective held breath finally exhaled. Meredith Wilson, who had been staring fixedly at her folded hands, looked up with tears in her eyes. "They train us to profile," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not officially, of course. Nothing in writing. But the message is clear: protect the exclusive experience, maintain the premium environment, ensure the right kind of customers feel special." "And the right kind means?" Amara prompted. "People who look like they belong," Meredith admitted. "Which usually means white, affluent, and familiar." From the video screen, CEO Williamson looked alarmed. "Ms. Wilson, I must object to this characterization of our training programs, which explicitly prohibit any form of discrimination." "With all due respect, sir," Meredith continued with newfound determination, "the official training says one thing, but what happens on the floor is different. We're evaluated on customer satisfaction scores from premium passengers, not on equal treatment. When supervisors tell us to maintain the exclusive atmosphere, we all know exactly what that means." Taylor nodded reluctantly. "Our quarterly reviews include metrics on ambience maintenance and premium environment integrity. The unspoken understanding is that too many people who don't look the part in premium spaces lowers those scores." Lawrence Phillips, who had been observing with growing discomfort, interjected, "This is absurd. I've been a Diamond member for 15 years, and I've never witnessed any systematic discrimination. Individual misunderstandings happen, but to suggest there's some coordinated effort to exclude people based on race is simply..." "Mr. Phillips," Amara interrupted calmly, "you intentionally spilled champagne on my suit and then pretended it was an accident. Would you care to explain that particular misunderstanding?" Phillips' face flushed. I didn't, it was genuinely an accident." "So you maintain that your elbow just happened to hit that server's tray in a way that directed the champagne specifically onto me, after which you offered a half-hearted apology and walked away?" Amara's tone remained conversational, but her eyes held his steadily. Phillips looked away first. "I may have been frustrated by the disruption at the entrance. Perhaps I wasn't as careful as I should have been." Jessica Miller, the flight attendant who had remained silent until now, suddenly spoke up. "I see it every day," she said quietly. "The assumptions we make, the different standards we apply. When Mr. Harrington asked to change seats to avoid sitting next to you, I accommodated him without question. I didn't even consider how that might feel from your perspective. And I questioned your first-class ticket 3 times, Bethany Carter added, her voice thick with emotion. I've never done that with a white passenger. Not once in 7 years. She looked up, tears streaming down her face. My daughter is biracial. She's 9. What am I teaching her when I act like this at work? What kind of world am I helping to create for her? The rawness of Bethany's question seemed to shift the atmosphere in the room from defensive to reflective. Even Lawrence Phillips appeared affected, his earlier indignation giving way to uncomfortable self-examination. CEO Williamson cleared his throat. Madam President-elect, it seems we have a more significant issue than I initially realized. I assure you, we will conduct a comprehensive review of our training programs, incentive structures, and corporate culture. That's a start, Mr. Williamson, Amara acknowledged. But corporate reviews often focus on policies rather than people. What I'm hearing today suggests the problem runs deeper than what can be fixed with revised handbooks or additional training videos. She turned back to the staff. Each of you recognized what happened today was wrong, not just because of who I turned out to be, but because of how you treated who you thought I was. That recognition is the beginning of change. Bradley Thompson nodded slowly. When I started in this industry, I experienced plenty of discrimination as a gay man. I told myself I'd never make others feel the way I felt. Yet here I am, perpetuating a different version of the same problem. We all have blind spots, Amara said gently. The question is whether we're willing to acknowledge them and do the hard work of change. For the next hour, the conversation continued, painful at times, revelatory at others. Staff shared experiences of being pressured to enforce unwritten rules about who belonged in premium spaces. Executives admitted to incentive structures that inadvertently rewarded subtle forms of exclusion. Lawrence Phillips eventually acknowledged a pattern of entitlement in his own behavior that he had never previously examined. Throughout it all, Amara listened more than she spoke, asking questions that probed beneath surface explanations to reveal deeper truths. Her approach wasn't punitive but diagnostic, identifying symptoms to understand the underlying disease. As the conversation began to wind down, CEO Williamson spoke up again. Madam President-elect, I want to thank you for this unconventional approach. It would have been easier for everyone if you had simply accepted our apologies and compensation offers. Instead, you forced us to confront uncomfortable realities that might otherwise have remained unaddressed. Easier isn't always better, Mr. Williamson, Amara replied. And quick solutions rarely solve deep problems. What happens now? Meredith asked tentatively. For us, I mean. That depends partly on you, Amara said. What do you think should happen? The question seemed to surprise them. Corporate America had trained them to expect decisions imposed from above, not solicited from below. After a moment of consideration, Bradley offered, what if instead of being fired, we became part of the solution? What if our experience today became a case study for training? A real-world example rather than a hypothetical scenario? Taylor nodded, building on the idea. We could document exactly what happened, how we rationalized our actions in the moment, and what we've learned from this conversation. I'd be willing to participate in that, Bethany said, wiping away tears. If it might help other staff avoid making the same mistakes. Even Lawrence Phillips, who had gradually shifted from defensive to contemplative throughout the discussion, spoke up. I've spent decades as a frequent traveler, and I've never once considered how my behavior might contribute to a culture of exclusion. Perhaps regular passengers should be included in this conversation as well. Amara looked around the table, noting the transformation that had occurred over the course of their discussion. Where there had initially been fear and defensiveness, she now saw reflection and possibility. It wasn't a perfect resolution, genuine change would require sustained effort beyond this single conversation, but it was a beginning. I think you're all onto something important, she said. Real change happens when those within a system recognize the need for transformation and commit to the difficult work of creating it. She turned to CEO Williamson on the screen. Mr. Williamson, you have an opportunity here that extends beyond damage control. Your company can become a leader in addressing issues that affect your industry and our society as a whole. The question is whether you're willing to embrace discomfort for the sake of progress. Williamson nodded thoughtfully. Madam President-elect, I believe we are. With your permission, I'd like to use today's incident as the foundation for a comprehensive review and reformation of our practices, not just in policy documents, but in the lived experience of both our staff and our passengers. You have more than my permission, Amara replied. You have my commitment to highlight and support meaningful efforts toward equity and inclusion, beginning with my first executive actions after inauguration. As the meeting concluded and arrangements were made for Amara's continued journey, something had shifted, not just for the individuals in that boardroom, but potentially for the systems they represented. A confrontation that could have ended in punishment and resentment had instead opened a door to understanding and change. Whether that door would remain open, whether the insights of this day would translate into lasting transformation, remained to be seen. But as Amara prepared to board her rescheduled flight, she carried with her not just the memory of discrimination, but the possibility of progress. The executive boardroom had emptied gradually as the discussion concluded, leaving Amara alone with Derek and the lingering energy of what had transpired. The large video screen still displayed CEO Gregory Williamson's face, though the others had departed to make arrangements for the continuing journey. Madam President-elect, Williamson said, his corporate polish somewhat softened by the previous hours of honest conversation, I'd like to discuss next steps more specifically, if you have a few more minutes. Amara checked her watch, the rescheduled flight would board in 40 minutes, and her full security detail had already established protocols for her transit through the terminal. I can give you 10 minutes, Mr. Williamson. Thank you. First, I want to reiterate that what you experienced today is completely unacceptable, regardless of the contributing factors we've identified. Williamson straightened his tie, a gesture that seemed to help him transition back to his executive mindset. I've directed our legal team to draft a comprehensive action plan addressing the issues raised in our discussion. We'll have it on your desk, or rather, delivered to your transition team, within 48 hours. I appreciate the quick response, Amara replied, but I hope you understand that corporate action plans often prioritize legal protection and public relations over meaningful change. Williamson nodded, accepting the critique. A fair point. That's why I'd like your input on a more substantive approach. He leaned forward, his image filling more of the screen. What if we established an oversight committee with real authority, including Bradley Thompson and Captain Anderson from our staff, plus independent civil rights experts and diversity specialists? They would have direct access to me and the board, with mandates to review hiring practices, promotion patterns, training programs, and customer experience policies. Before Amara could respond, a commotion outside the boardroom door drew her attention. Derek moved quickly to investigate, opening the door to reveal Nicholas Bryant, the airport director, engaged in an intense conversation with a woman whose press credentials hung visibly around her neck. I'm sorry, Madam President-elect, Bryant said, noticing Amara's attention. Media presence has intensified significantly. Someone leaked details about the incident, and several outlets are running with the story. What angles are they taking? Amara asked, her political instincts activating. Various, Bryant admitted uncomfortably. Some are focusing on the discrimination aspect, others on how you handled it. There's significant social media activity as well, with hashtags like #VIPWhileBlack and #AmaraWashingtonEffect already trending. Derek checked his secure phone. Confirmed, ma'am. Your communications director is requesting guidance on official response. The situation was evolving rapidly from a personal incident to a national conversation, exactly the kind of distraction Amara had hoped to avoid so close to inauguration. Yet it also presented an opportunity to address issues that had been central to her campaign. Mr. Williamson, she said, turning back to the screen, it seems our timeline has accelerated. Your oversight committee is a good start, but we need to think bigger. This incident is becoming symbolic of experiences shared by millions of Americans. Williamson looked concerned but nodded his understanding. What do you propose? A comprehensive industry initiative, Amara replied without hesitation. Your airline taking the lead, but extending to the entire transportation sector. Transparent reporting of demographic data on premium service access and customer complaint resolution. Independent audits of customer experience metrics to identify disparate impacts. Revised training that addresses not just explicit bias but the subtle forms of discrimination we discussed today. That's ambitious, Williamson acknowledged. So is claiming to value equality while maintaining systems that perpetuate inequality, Amara countered. The question is whether you want to lead this change or be forced to follow it. Their exchange was interrupted by another notification on Derek's phone. Ma'am, the transition team's economic policy director is requesting to join this conversation. He suggests there may be regulatory implications to consider. Amara weighed the request. Her campaign had promised a more equitable economy, with specific attention to industries where discriminatory practices affected access and opportunity. This incident, unwelcome as it had been, provided a concrete example of exactly the issues she had pledged to address. Patch him in, she decided. Within moments, the screen split to include Martin Cahill, a distinguished economist who had left his tenured position at Princeton to join Amara's transition team. Madam President-elect, he greeted her, I apologize for the intrusion, but given the public attention this incident is receiving, I thought it prudent to discuss potential policy frameworks. Go ahead, Martin. Your inaugural address already includes language about corporate accountability for equity outcomes, Cahill began. This situation could serve as a case study for the approach you've advocated. Using federal contracting requirements and regulatory oversight to incentivize meaningful change rather than superficial compliance. Williamson's expression tightened slightly at the mention of regulations, but he remained engaged. As I mentioned to the President-elect, we're already committing to substantial internal reforms. Which are commendable, Cahill acknowledged, but individual corporate initiatives, however well-intentioned, rarely address industry-wide patterns. What happened today wasn't unique to your airline, Mr. Williamson. It reflects broader systemic issues that require structural solutions. The conversation had shifted from addressing a single incident to contemplating policy changes that could affect entire industries, exactly the kind of substantive discussion Amara had hoped would define her presidency rather than the symbolic politics that often dominated Washington. Outside the boardroom, the media presence continued to grow. Derek received updates on the evolving coverage, some of which had begun to speculate about potential executive actions the new administration might take in response to the incident. Within the secure room, the discussion between Amara, Williamson, and Cahill evolved into a substantive exploration of how corporate practices, economic incentives, and regulatory frameworks intersected to either reinforce or challenge existing patterns of discrimination. What if, Amara suggested, drawing on her medical background, we approached this like a public health issue? Identify the systemic factors contributing to the problem, implement targeted interventions, measure outcomes, and adjust as needed. That's essentially what we've proposed for your economic equity initiative, Cahill noted, but this incident provides a concrete example that makes the abstract concepts more accessible to the public. Williamson, who had been listening carefully, leaned forward. I've spent my career in corporate environments where government regulation is typically viewed as an adversarial constraint rather than a collaborative tool. But I'm beginning to see how the right kind of regulatory framework could actually support the changes we're discussing. Exactly, Amara agreed. Effective regulation doesn't just prohibit harmful behavior, it creates conditions where doing the right thing becomes the most advantageous choice. As they continued exploring possibilities, Taylor Stevens requested permission to rejoin the conversation, bringing with him Meredith Wilson and Bradley Thompson. Madam President-elect, if we're discussing structural changes, we'd like to contribute our perspective from the front lines. Amara welcomed them back, recognizing the value of including voices from different levels of the organization. What followed was a remarkably candid discussion of how corporate policies translated into daily practices, where disconnect occurred between stated values and actual behaviors, and what kinds of interventions might genuinely shift entrenched patterns. The performance metrics are key, Bradley emphasized. We're evaluated and rewarded based on maintaining what management calls the premium experience, but that concept is loaded with unexamined assumptions about who belongs in premium spaces and what makes those spaces exclusive. Meredith nodded vigorously. Exactly. When supervisors tell us to maintain standards, they never explicitly mention race or class, but the examples they use and the feedback they provide make it clear what they really mean. Taylor added, and the customer satisfaction surveys reinforce it all. Premium passengers, who are predominantly white and wealthy, rate their experience higher when the premium spaces remain. Well, predominantly white and wealthy. CEO Williamson looked increasingly uncomfortable but didn't interrupt or deny their observations. Instead, he asked questions that suggested genuine interest in understanding dynamics he had perhaps never directly encountered from his executive position. As the discussion progressed, Captain Anderson requested permission to join as well, bringing another valuable perspective. In flight operations, we have rigorous protocols for identifying and addressing safety issues, with mandatory reporting and continuous improvement processes. What if we applied that same structured approach to equity issues? The idea resonated with everyone present. By the time their expanded conversation concluded, the outlines of a comprehensive approach had emerged, one that included revised metrics, reformed training, structural incentives, accountability mechanisms, and ongoing evaluation, all supported by appropriate regulatory frameworks. I believe we have the beginnings of something significant here, Williamson acknowledged. Not just a response to today's incident, but a model for addressing deeply embedded patterns across our industry and perhaps beyond. Amara checked her watch. Their 10 minutes had extended to nearly an hour, and her rescheduled flight would soon begin boarding. Mr. Williamson, I appreciate your engagement and apparent commitment. My team will follow up regarding the details we've discussed. Thank you, Madam President-elect. And if I may say so, your approach to this situation has been enlightening. Most people in your position would have either leveraged their status immediately or sought retribution afterward. Your choice to engage in genuine dialogue rather than exercise power has been instructive. Amara smiled slightly. The most effective use of power is often restraint, Mr. Williamson. And the most valuable conversations happen when we're willing to listen more than we speak. As she prepared to conclude the meeting, one final knock came at the door. Derek admitted Jessica Miller, the flight attendant who had been part of the earlier confrontation. She appeared nervous but determined. Madam President-elect, I just wanted to let you know that we've been assigned a new crew for your flight, with Captain Anderson still in command. Everything has been arranged for your comfort. Thank you, Jessica, Amara replied. But I'd actually prefer to have the original crew, including you, if that's possible. Jessica looked startled. You would? After how we treated you? Especially after that, Amara confirmed. We've had an important conversation here today. I'd like to continue it, in a way, by showing that reconciliation is possible when we acknowledge mistakes and commit to doing better. Jessica blinked rapidly, emotion evident in her eyes. I'll let the team know. Thank you, ma'am. As the meeting finally dispersed and preparations were made for Amara's departure, Derek leaned in to provide a security update. Full detail is in position, ma'am. We've established a secure corridor to the gate. Media has been contained to designated areas. Amara nodded her acknowledgement, gathering her still damp briefcase and mentally preparing to transition from this unexpected detour back to the responsibilities awaiting her in Washington. What had begun as a simple desire for normalcy had evolved into something far more significant, a microcosm of the challenges and opportunities that would define her presidency. Ready when you are, ma'am, Derek said. Amara took a deep breath. Let's proceed. The journey from the executive boardroom to Gate 24B felt markedly different from Amara's earlier passage through the airport. Where before she had moved through the terminal as just another traveler, subject to the same casual dismissals and scrutiny as any other black woman, she now progressed through a carefully orchestrated procession. Secret Service agents flanked her path, airport security cleared the way, and executives hovered anxiously nearby. The transformation was both ironic and instructive, a visceral demonstration of how quickly treatment could change when status was recognized. But amid the formality and deference, Amara noticed something else, the eyes of ordinary travelers watching her progress, their expressions ranging from starstruck excitement to thoughtful contemplation to embarrassed recognition. News of the incident had spread throughout the terminal, with varying degrees of accuracy. Some passengers held up phones, recording her passage for social media. Others nudged companions and whispered behind their hands. A few, particularly women of color, offered knowing nods or subtle gestures of solidarity. When they reached the gate area, Amara found the boarding process already underway, though her presence temporarily paused the activity as heads turned and conversations halted. The gate agent, not Bethany this time, but a young man who appeared both nervous and awed, quickly recovered his professional demeanor. "Madam President-elect, we're honored to have you on board. We've prepared for your immediate boarding whenever you're ready." "Thank you," Amara replied, "but I'll board according to my assigned group, just like everyone else." The statement, overheard by nearby passengers, elicited surprised murmurs and a few appreciative nods. Derek looked concerned but didn't object, knowing by now that his protectee's principles weren't easily overridden by conventional protocols. As Amara settled into the waiting area, a subtle but significant shift occurred around her. The first-class passengers who had earlier regarded her with suspicion or dismissal now displayed an almost comical eagerness to demonstrate respect and recognition. Keith Harrington, who had requested to be moved rather than sit beside her, now stood awkwardly at the periphery, clearly uncertain how to navigate their next encounter. Lawrence Phillips approached cautiously, expensive business card extended between manicured fingers. "Madam President-elect, I wanted to personally apologize again for our unfortunate interaction earlier. Perhaps we could discuss opportunities for my firm to contribute to your administration's economic initiatives. We have considerable experience in public-private partnerships that—" "Thank you, Mr. Phillips," Amara interrupted gently, "but this isn't the appropriate time for those discussions. Your card will find its way to the relevant department if you'd like to submit it through official channels." Phillips withdrew, deflated but still calculating, his earlier remorse seemingly forgotten in the pursuit of advantage. Amara watched him retreat, noting how quickly the performance of contrition could transform into opportunism when power dynamics shifted. When first-class boarding was announced, Amara rose and joined the line, presenting her boarding pass like any other passenger. Jessica Miller, who had indeed remained on duty as requested, checked her documentation with professional courtesy that now seemed tinged with genuine respect rather than forced deference. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Washington," she said quietly. "Thank you for everything today." Aboard the aircraft, Amara found her original window seat, 12A, prepared with meticulous care. The champagne stain on her suit had dried to a faint discoloration, but the memory of the incident remained vivid for everyone involved. As other passengers boarded, their curious glances and whispered observations created an atmosphere of heightened awareness throughout the cabin. Once boarding completed, Captain Anderson's voice came over the intercom, "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 1552 to Washington, D.C. My name is Captain James Anderson, and on behalf of our entire crew, I want to thank you for your patience during today's delay." There was a brief pause before he continued, his voice taking on a more personal tone. "Before we depart, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that something significant happened in our airport today, an incident that challenged us to examine how we treat one another and the assumptions we make based on appearance rather than character." A hush fell over the cabin as passengers realized this was no ordinary pre-flight announcement. "As your captain, I believe in transparency and accountability. Earlier today, a distinguished passenger experienced treatment that fell far short of our stated values of respect and inclusion. That passenger is with us now, Dr. Amara Washington, our President-elect. Murmurs rippled through the cabin as heads turned toward Amara, who maintained her composed expression despite the unexpected spotlight. What's remarkable isn't that this incident occurred, such experiences are unfortunately common for too many Americans. What's extraordinary is how Dr. Washington responded, not with righteous anger or demands for special treatment, but with an invitation to honest dialogue and a commitment to meaningful change. Captain Anderson's voice carried the weight of personal conviction. As a result of that conversation, our airline is committing to comprehensive reforms in how we train our staff, evaluate our service, and create truly inclusive environments for all passengers. We hope you'll join us in reflecting on how we can each contribute to a society where dignity and respect aren't determined by appearance, title, or circumstance. The announcement concluded with standard safety information, but the atmosphere in the cabin had transformed. Passengers exchanged thoughtful glances, some nodding in agreement with the captain's message, others shifting uncomfortably as they perhaps recognized their own behaviors in the implicit critique. As the aircraft taxied toward the runway, Bradley Thompson approached Amara's seat, discreetly placing a small envelope on her tray table. From the crew, he explained quietly before continuing his preparations for takeoff. Inside, Amara found handwritten notes from each staff member involved in the earlier confrontation. Not formal corporate apologies, but personal reflections on what they had learned and commitments to how they would apply those insights moving forward. Meredith's note included a photo of her biracial niece with the simple message, "Thank you for helping create a better world for her." Bethany had written about her mixed-race daughter and how today's experience had forced her to confront her own internalized biases. Even Lawrence Phillips had contributed a note, though his seemed more calculated than reflective, emphasizing his corporate diversity initiatives rather than personal growth. Still, the collection represented something meaningful, not perfect understanding or complete transformation, but the beginning of a journey toward greater awareness. As the plane accelerated down the runway and lifted into the evening sky, Amara gazed out the window at the sprawling Atlanta metropolis below. The city's lights blended and blurred, individual differences indistinguishable from this elevation. A visual reminder of the perspective she would need to maintain as president while never forgetting the individual experiences that shaped each American life. 1 year later, Amara Washington stood in the same airport, preparing to board another commercial flight, one of the few she had taken since assuming office. The past 12 months had been filled with the expected challenges of a new administration, legislative battles, international crises, partisan conflicts. But amid those high-profile struggles, quieter transformations had unfolded as well. The airline industry had undergone significant changes, spearheaded by what the media had dubbed the Washington Protocol, a comprehensive framework for addressing bias in customer service interactions, evaluating corporate practices for disparate impacts, and creating accountability mechanisms with real consequences. What had begun as one airline's response to an embarrassing incident had expanded into an industry-wide initiative, with measurable improvements in equitable treatment. Meredith Wilson and Taylor Stevens had both remained with the airline, becoming trainers in the new program after completing extensive education in diversity and inclusion practices. Their first-hand experience with the incident and its aftermath made them particularly effective at helping other staff recognize and address unconscious bias. Bradley Thompson had been promoted to a position on the corporate equity team, where his operational experience provided valuable insight into implementing practical changes rather than symbolic gestures. Captain Anderson continued flying but also served on the Industry Oversight Committee established in the wake of the incident. As President Washington moved through the terminal, with appropriate security but without the excessive pageantry that often surrounded presidential travel, she noticed the subtle but significant differences in how diverse passengers were treated throughout the process. Not perfect equality, not yet, but measurable progress toward the vision she had articulated throughout her campaign and presidency. At the gate, she was greeted by a young black female agent whose professional demeanor conveyed respect without the exaggerated deference or underlying fear that often characterized interactions with power. "Good morning, Madam President. Your boarding pass, please." The normal transaction, being treated like any other passenger while her office was still acknowledged, represented exactly the balance Amara had sought from the beginning, respect based on common humanity rather than fear based on position. As she moved toward the boarding area, a small commotion caught her attention. A young black girl, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, had broken away from her mother and was pointing excitedly. "Mom! Mom! That's her. That's the lady who made them change the rules." The mother looked mortified, quickly trying to hush her daughter as she noticed the president's security detail. "Jasmine! You can't just, I'm so sorry, Madam President." Amara smiled and approached them, signaling to her security that it was okay. She crouched slightly to meet the girl's eye level. "Hello there. I'm Amara. What's your name?" "Jasmine Taylor," the girl replied, suddenly shy but still vibrating with excitement. "My mom and I saw you on TV. You made the airplane people change how they treat people." "That's a pretty good summary," Amara acknowledged with a warm smile. "But you know what? I didn't do it alone. Sometimes it takes a lot of people working together to change things." Jasmine considered this seriously. "But you started it. You didn't get mad even when they were mean. You just showed them how to be better." The simplicity and insight of the child's observation struck Amara deeply. Not, "That's the president," or, "That's the famous person," but, "That's the lady who made them change the rules." In the political calculations and policy discussions that dominated Washington, it was easy to lose sight of what progress looked like through the eyes of those who would inherit its benefits, or its shortcomings. "You're absolutely right, Jasmine," Amara said. "Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is show people a better way forward." As she boarded the aircraft minutes later, President Washington reflected on how that chance encounter encapsulated everything she had hoped to accomplish, not just in response to that day's incident a year ago, but throughout her presidency and beyond. Real change wasn't measured in headlines or approval ratings, but in the experiences of people like young Jasmine, growing up in a world where progress, however imperfect and incomplete, created new possibilities. Captain Anderson, yes, the same James Anderson, greeted her as she stepped aboard. "Welcome back, Madam President. 1 year later, almost to the day." "So it is, Captain. How have things been?" "Different," he replied with a meaningful look. "Better, I think. Not perfect, but better." "That's all we can ask for," Amara said. "Progress, not perfection." As the flight prepared for departure, Amara settled into her window seat, not in first class this time, but in the main cabin, a choice she had made deliberately. Outside, the evening sun cast long shadows across the tarmac, a reminder that every day brought both light and darkness, sometimes intermingled in ways that made them difficult to separate. The true test of leadership, she had come to believe, wasn't in grand gestures or sweeping proclamations, but in the everyday moments when principles met reality, when the opportunity to use power for retribution gave way to the harder, more transformative choice to use it for reconciliation. When the easy path of punishment yielded to the more challenging road of understanding and change. As the aircraft lifted into the sky, President Amara Washington looked out at the country spread below, a nation still grappling with its contradictions and complexities, still striving to live up to its highest ideals despite recurring failures and setbacks. The journey toward a more just and equitable society hadn't ended with that confrontation in the airport lounge a year ago. In many ways, it had only just begun. But beginnings, she knew, were powerful things. Sometimes all it took was one person refusing to accept the status quo, one conversation that penetrated defensive barriers, one moment when truth was spoken and truly heard. Sometimes all it took was the courage to stand firm in your humanity, even when others failed to recognize it, and the wisdom to offer them a path to recognition rather than retreat. What's your experience with discrimination or witnessing unfair treatment? Have you ever been in a situation where someone was judged based on appearance rather than character? Share your story in the comments below. If this video resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful true stories that make us think differently about the world around us. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thank you for watching, and remember, real change begins with each of us choosing a better way forward. This powerful narrative illustrates how systemic discrimination operates beneath the surface of everyday interactions. Dr. Washington's experience reveals how bias persists even in premium spaces, where assumptions about who belongs are often based on appearance rather than qualifications. The story demonstrates that true leadership isn't about wielding power for punishment but using influence to create meaningful change. By choosing dialogue over retribution, Dr. Washington transformed an individual incident into systemic improvement. We see how quickly treatment changes when status is recognized, highlighting the superficiality of respect based solely on position rather than inherent dignity. This exposes the performative nature of corporate values that crumble under pressure. The resolution shows that effective change requires addressing root causes rather than symptoms. Quick fixes and apologies don't solve entrenched problems, only sustained effort and structural reforms create lasting transformation. Perhaps most importantly, the story reminds us that each of us faces daily choices, to perpetuate harmful systems or challenge them, to react with defensiveness or openness when confronted with our biases. Real progress happens not through grand gestures but through individual decisions to recognize humanity in others and stand firm in our own dignity. What's your experience with discrimination or witnessing unfair treatment? Have you ever been in a situation where someone was judged based on appearance rather than character? Share your story in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful true stories that make us think differently about the world around us. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Thank you for watching, and remember, real change begins with each of us choosing a better way forward.